What if I told you there was a prophet who heard directly from God, who spoke some of the most breathtaking prophecies about the Messiah anywhere in the Old Testament, who was visited by the angel of the Lord with a drawn sword, and who was so spiritually blind in the moment that the donkey he was riding saw the angel before he did? A man whose gift was real and whose greed was realer. A man whom God used to bless Israel 3 times when a terrified king was paying him to curse them, and who then turned around and gave that same king advice on how to destroy Israel from the inside when the cursing would not work. A man whose name appears in the New Testament not once but 3 times, and never as a compliment. He is not a simple character. He is not a cartoon villain or a false prophet in the obvious sense. He heard from God. God spoke to him. The prophecies that came out of his mouth were genuine, and some of them were magnificent. And yet the New Testament holds him up as a warning. The way of Balaam, the error of Balaam, the teaching of Balaam, shorthand for a specific kind of spiritual corruption that is perhaps more common and more dangerous than outright unbelief. His name was Balaam, son of Beor, the prophet for hire, the man the donkey outsaw. This is his complete story, the summons and the refusals and the eventual yes, the talking donkey and the drawn sword, the 7 altars and the 3 oracles, and the king who kept moving the prophet to a different hill, hoping for a different result, and the advice at the end that cost Israel more than any curse ever could have. Don't look away. It begins now. It begins in Moab, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, in the days when Israel was camped in the plains of Moab, after 40 years of wilderness wandering. They had come through the desert. They had defeated the Amorites. They had taken the land of Sihon and Og, and the sheer number of them, the scale of the Israelite nation moving through the region, was terrifying to the peoples around them. The king of Moab at that time was a man named Balak, the son of Zippor, and Balak was afraid. In Numbers 22 verse 3 and 4, Moab was overcome with fear of the people of Israel, because they were many. Moab was in dread of the people of Israel. And Moab said to the elders of Midian, "This horde will lick up all that is around us, as the ox licks up the grass of the field." The language is vivid, and the fear is real. Balak had watched what Israel had done to the Amorites, and he knew that a military confrontation alone would not be enough. So he chose a different strategy. If he could not defeat Israel with swords, perhaps he could defeat them with words, with a curse, with the invocation of divine power against them before any battle began. For this he needed a specific kind of man. In Numbers 22, 5 and 6, Balak sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor at Pethor, which is near the river in the land of the people of Ammon, to call him, saying, "Behold, a people has come out of Egypt. They cover the face of the earth, and they are dwelling opposite me. Come now, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I shall be able to defeat them and drive them from the land, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed. He whom you bless is blessed, and he whom you curse is cursed." Balaam had a reputation that had reached the king of Moab. He was known as a man whose words had weight. When he blessed something, it was blessed. When he cursed something, it was cursed. Whatever the source of that power, and the story will make clear that the source was God himself, the reputation was real enough that Balak was willing to send messengers a considerable distance and pay considerable fees to get this man to Moab. The elders of Moab and Midian came to Balaam with the fees for divination in their hand, and delivered Balak's message. And Balaam said to them, "Lodge here tonight, and I will bring you word again as the Lord speaks to me." He told them he needed to hear from God before he could answer. That night God came to Balaam and said, "Who are these men with you?" Balaam explained the situation, and God's response was clear and direct. In verse 12, God said to Balaam, "You shall not go with them. You shall not curse the people, for they are blessed." You shall not curse the people, not because Balaam lacked the power, not because the curse would fail mechanically, but because Israel was blessed, and the God of Israel was not going to allow a prophet for hire to reverse that blessing with a paid invocation. Balaam sent the messengers back to Balak with the refusal. "I cannot go with you, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you." Balak was not finished. He sent more messengers this time, and they were more important than the first group, more numerous and more honorable, the text says. and the offer was upgraded. In Numbers 22:17, Balak promised, "I will surely do you great honor, and whatever you say to me I will do. Come, curse this people for me. Whatever you say to me I will do." It was an open-ended promise of reward, and Balaam's response this time is revealing. He said the right things. In verse 18 he said, "Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do less or more." The language was right. The theology sounded correct. A house full of silver and gold cannot override the word of God. Balaam said it plainly. And then he said, "But please, you also stay here tonight, that I may know what more the Lord will say to me." The messengers had already been told no by God. Balaam had already told Balak he could not come. But instead of sending the new messengers home, as he had sent the first group, he invited them to stay the night. He said, "Let me ask again," not because he was uncertain about what God had said, but because the offer of a house full of silver and gold was sitting in the room with him, and he had not yet found a way to say no to it completely. God came to Balaam again that night, and in Numbers 22:20, God said, "Go with them, but only do what I tell you." God had said no. Then Balaam kept asking, and God said go. Was God changing his mind? The text and what follows suggests something more specific is happening. God knew what was in Balaam's heart. He knew that Balaam wanted to go, that the money was pulling him, that the staying and asking again was not genuine spiritual inquiry, but the behavior of a man hoping God would change his answer so he could do what he already wanted to do. And God gave him permission to go, while the anger of God was kindled against him for going. Both things at the same time, permission and anger. You may go, and I am angry that you want to. The morning came, and Balaam rose, and saddled his donkey, and went with the princes of Moab. And the anger of God was kindled, because he went, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as his adversary. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road, with a drawn sword in his hand, and the donkey turned aside out of the road and went into the field. Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back to the road. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the vineyards with a wall on either side. When the donkey saw the angel, she pressed against the wall and pressed Balaam's foot against the wall, and he struck her again. Then the angel stood in a place so narrow that there was no way to turn either right or left. And the donkey sat down under Balaam, and Balaam's anger was kindled, and he struck the donkey with his staff. 3 times the donkey saw what the prophet could not see. 3 times she responded to the reality in front of her with appropriate animal wisdom, and 3 times Balaam struck her for it, each time more angrily than the last. The man with the gift of prophecy, furious at his animal for behaving strangely, completely unable to perceive the reason for the behavior. The prophet hired to see spiritual reality could not see the angel standing in his road with a drawn sword. The donkey saw it immediately every time. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times? And Balaam answered the donkey. He did not cry out in shock. He did not fall off the animal in terror. He continued the argument, as if the conversation were completely ordinary. In Numbers 22 verses 29, he said to the donkey, "Because you have made a fool of me, I wish I had a sword in my hand, for then I would kill you." He told her he wished he could kill her, and the donkey replied with one of the most quietly devastating questions in the Old Testament. In verse 30, the donkey said to Balaam, "Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all your life long to this day? Is it my habit to treat you this way?" And he said, "No. Am I not your donkey on which you have ridden all your life long?" The donkey that had faithfully carried him for years, whose behavior was so reliably ordinary that any deviation from it should have been a signal rather than an irritation, made this argument. And Balaam had no answer but no. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, and he bowed down and fell on his face. And the angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out to oppose you, because your way is perverse before me." The donkey saw me and turned aside before me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, surely just now I would have killed you and let her live. The angel made it explicit. The donkey saved his life. The animal that Balaam had struck 3 times and threatened to kill had seen the drawn sword each time and turned away from it, and in doing so, kept Balaam alive. The prophet owed his life to the faithfulness of the animal he could barely restrain his anger toward. Balaam said to the angel, "I have sinned, for I did not know that you stood in the road against me. Now therefore, if it is evil in your sight, I will turn back." And the angel said, "Go with the men, but speak only the word that I tell you." The encounter on the road had clarified something. The journey continued. But the terms had been reinforced with a drawn sword and a talking donkey, and the explicit statement that Balaam's way had been perverse before God. He would go. He would arrive at Balak's court, but he would not be speaking his own words when he opened his mouth. Balak came out to meet Balaam at a city of Moab on the border, and his greeting carries the exasperation of a man who has been waiting impatiently. In Numbers 22:37, Balak said to Balaam, "Did I not send to you to call you? Why did you not come to me? Am I not able to honor you?" And Balaam answered, "I have come to you now. Have I any power of my own to speak anything? The word that God puts in my mouth, that must I speak." He arrived at Balak's court, and Balak sacrificed oxen and sheep and sent portions to Balaam and to the princes who were with him. The next morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal, from which he could see a portion of the Israelite people in the plains below, and the attempt to curse them began. Balaam told Balak to build 7 altars and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams. They did. Balaam offered a bull and a ram on each altar. Then he went apart to receive the word he was supposed to speak, and God met Balaam and put a word in his mouth. Balaam returned to Balak and the princes of Moab standing beside the 7 altars and their burnt offerings, and he delivered the first oracle. It began with a description of his own situation, called by Balak from the east to curse Jacob. And then it turned. In Numbers 23:8, "How can I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced?" The curse that Balak had paid for would not come. The blessing was there instead. The oracle continued with one of the most striking images in Numbers. In verse 9, "For from the top of the crags I see him, from the hills I behold him. Behold a people dwelling alone, and not counting itself among the nations." Israel was set apart. Their distinctness was not weakness but design, and the oracle concluded in verse 10 with these words, "Who can count the dust of Jacob, or number the 4th part of Israel? Let me die the death of the upright, and let my end be like his." Let me die the death of the upright. The prophet for hire, who had come to curse, looked at Israel and said he wanted to die as they died. He wanted their end. Something in what he saw, when God opened his mouth, was so far beyond the price Balak was paying, that the prophet himself was moved by it. Balak was furious. In verse 11 he said to Balaam, "What have you done to me? I took you to curse my enemies, and behold, you have done nothing but bless them." And Balaam answered, "Must I not take care to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth?" Balak decided the location was the problem. Perhaps from a different vantage point the oracle would come out differently. He took Balaam to the top of Pisgah and had 7 more altars built, and 7 more bulls and rams prepared, and the whole sequence repeated. Balaam went apart again to meet God. God put a word in his mouth again, and this oracle was even more direct than the first. In Numbers 23:19 and 20, "God is not man that he should lie, or a son of man that he should change his mind. Has he said, and will he not do it? Or has he spoken, and will he not fulfill it? Behold, I received a command to bless. He has blessed, and I cannot revoke it." The second oracle made explicit what the first had suggested. God's word to bless Israel was not reversible. Not by Balaam's mouth, not by Balak's altars, not by any amount of silver and gold or strategic repositioning on different hills. Balak was even more furious. In verse 25 he said, "Do not curse them at all, and do not bless them at all." He was done with the whole exercise, and just wanted it to stop. But Balaam reminded him that he had said from the beginning he could only speak what God put in his mouth. Balak tried one more time, a third location, the top of Peor, 7 more altars, 7 more bulls and rams, and this time something different happened. In Numbers 24:1, when Balaam saw that it pleased the Lord to bless Israel, he did not go, as at other times, to look for omens, but set his face toward the wilderness. He stopped trying to manage the outcome through divination. He simply looked at Israel in the plains below, and the Spirit of God came upon him. The third oracle is the most magnificent of the three. In Numbers 24 verse 5 through 7, "How lovely are your tents, O Jacob, your encampments, O Israel, like palm groves that stretch afar, like gardens beside a river, like aloes that the Lord has planted, like cedar trees beside the waters. Water shall flow from his buckets, and his seed shall be in many waters. His king shall be higher than Agag, and his kingdom shall be exalted." The man hired to curse was producing poetry of blessing. The encampments of the people he was supposed to destroy were lovely in the vision God gave him. And then in verse 17, the oracle reached its climax with one of the most significant messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. "I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. It shall crush the forehead of Moab, and break down all the sons of Sheth." A star out of Jacob, a scepter rising out of Israel, centuries before the birth, from the mouth of a pagan prophet hired by the enemy of Israel to curse them, came a prophecy pointing toward the one who would be born into that same people. The prophet for hire had looked at Israel from the top of Peor and spoken the coming of the Messiah. Balak's anger this time was beyond words. He struck his hands together and told Balaam to go home. He had called him to curse, and Balaam had blessed 3 times. There would be no reward. Balaam said he was going home, but before he left, he spoke one more oracle. It was not for Balak. It was about Moab and the surrounding nations, and it was about judgment. The same mouth that had blessed Israel turned and declared doom on the nations arrayed against her. The fourth oracle in Numbers 24:17. The fifth and sixth and seventh following with the same certainty. The prophet's final words from the hills of Moab were not about the money or the failed contract. They were about what he had seen. And then Balaam rose and went back to his place, and Balak also went his way. That is where most retellings of the story end, and if they ended there, Balaam might be remembered as a complicated figure who ultimately did the right thing, despite significant temptation. The man who refused to curse what God had blessed. The prophet who spoke magnificently, even from an unlikely mouth. But the story does not end there. In Numbers 25, immediately after Balaam's departure, a catastrophe struck Israel. The people of Israel began to whore with the daughters of Moab. They were invited to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods, and Israel yoked itself to Baal of Peor. The result was devastating. A plague fell on Israel that killed 24,000 people before it was stopped. Numbers 31 explains the connection explicitly. When Israel made war against Midian and put Balaam himself to death in the battle, Moses said to the people in verse 16, "Behold, these women caused the people of Israel to act treacherously against the Lord in the incident of Peor on the advice of Balaam, so that the plague came among the congregation of the Lord." The curse would not work. The oracles kept coming out as blessing, and so Balaam, having failed to curse Israel from the hill, apparently went back to Balak and gave him different advice. If you cannot destroy them with a curse, destroy them from within. Send in the women, lead them into sexual immorality and idolatry. Get them to worship the gods of Moab and Midian at your feasts. Get them to sin against their own God, and their own God will do the work of judgment that the curse could not do. 24,000 people died in the plague that followed. The man who had blessed Israel 3 times from 3 different hilltops gave the advice that killed 24,000 of them. The prophet whose mouth God had controlled gave his own strategic counsel once the divine oracles were finished. He could not curse them, he could not make God's protection disappear, but he could advise their enemies on how to make them stumble against themselves. This is the way of Balaam that the New Testament warns about. In 2 Peter 2:15, the apostle speaks of those who have gone astray and followed the way of Balaam the son of Beor, who loved gain from wrongdoing. In Jude verse 11, "Woe to them, for they walked in the way of Cain, and abandoned themselves for the sake of gain to Balaam's error." In Revelation 2:14, Jesus himself said to the church at Pergamum, "I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel, so that they might eat food sacrificed to idols, and practice sexual immorality. 3 separate New Testament writers, 3 separate warnings: the way of Balaam, the error of Balaam, the teaching of Balaam, all pointing to the same thing. A man who knew God well enough to speak accurately for him, who could not be bought into cursing what God had blessed, but who could be bought into advising the enemy on how to make the blessed people stumble. The gift was real, the greed was realer, and when the gift would not yield what the greed wanted, the greed found another way. The talking donkey is the most famous part of this story, but perhaps the most important part is the part that comes after the oracles, because the donkey is memorable and theologically interesting, but the real warning is not the blindness on the road to Moab. The real warning is the strategic counsel given afterward. The real blindness was not failing to see the angel with the drawn sword. The real blindness was failing to see that what he did next, the advice given to Balak, the stumbling block laid before Israel, was more devastating than any curse from a hilltop could have been. Balaam died in the battle of Numbers 31. Israel put him to death with the sword, along with the kings of Midian. The prophet for hire, who had outlasted his usefulness to the enemies who had hired him, was killed in the same battle as the people whose destruction he had advised. The sword that had stood in the road on the way to Moab eventually found him. The first thing is the warning about gifts used without integrity. Balaam had a real gift. God spoke to him. The prophecies were genuine. The Messianic oracle from the top of Peor was breathtaking. But a gift from God is not the same thing as a life surrendered to God. Balaam could channel the word of God through his mouth and walk away from that channel and give human strategic advice in the next breath that produced 24,000 deaths. The gift did not sanctify the rest of him. He remained a man for hire who happened to have an extraordinary channel for divine communication, while his heart was oriented toward the fees. The second thing is the warning about persistence in the direction of what we want when God has already said no. God told Balaam he could not go. Balaam invited the second delegation to stay the night so he could ask again, and God gave him permission to go with kindled anger. Not because God changed his mind, but because God let Balaam have the direction he was already determined to go, and the consequences that came with it. Not every open door is God's invitation. Some open doors are God stepping back and saying, very well. The yes that comes after a no we pushed past carries its own weight. The third thing is the donkey, not the comedy of a talking animal, but what the donkey represents. There are things that ordinary people can see, that those with spiritual gifts cannot see, when those gifts are being bent toward greed and self-interest. The donkey saw the angel clearly every time. Balaam, the man with the reputation for seeing spiritual reality, was blind to the sword in the road. The gift does not guarantee the sight. The sight comes with the surrender, and when the surrender is compromised, the sight goes with it. The fourth thing is perhaps the most searching. Balaam knew the right things to say. He said them. The oracles were magnificent. The refusals were theologically correct. A house full of silver and gold cannot override the word of the Lord my God. Let me die the death of the upright. A star shall come out of Jacob. The words were right. But the man behind the words was pointed toward the money from the beginning, found ways around every obstacle between himself and the payment, and in the end, gave the advice that caused more damage to Israel than any curse could have. The way of Balaam is not the way of someone who denies God openly. It is the way of someone who speaks for God accurately, while being oriented towards something else entirely. It is the specific corruption of the spiritual person who can deliver the right words and still be in the business of delivering them for the wrong reasons. It is the teaching that has exactly enough truth in it to be trusted and exactly enough self-interest underneath to be deadly. Jesus said to the church at Pergamum, I have this against you. Some of you hold the teaching of Balaam. 2,000 years after the oracles on the hills of Moab, the warning is still being addressed to specific people in specific communities, because the way of Balaam did not die with Balaam in the Battle of Numbers 31. It persists wherever there are people with genuine gifts who have made peace with using those gifts for hire. Wherever the oracle is accurate and the advisor is calculating the fee at the same time. Wherever the blessing is real and the stumbling block is being quietly assembled behind the scenes. And sometimes the most important question a person with a gift can ask is whether the people around them without the reputation, without the prophetic resume, without the fees for divination in their hand, are seeing something that the gift has made them too proud, or too greedy, or too self-certain to see themselves. If this story stirred something in you, do not let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story we bring to life. There are so many more lives and warnings and wonders still waiting to be told. And if Balaam's story left something sitting with you, if it made you look honestly at the direction your gifts are pointed, at the second delegations you have invited to stay the night, at the strategic counsel you have given after the official words were finished, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. A star shall come out of Jacob. The prophecy was true. The man who spoke it was a warning. Both things are still worth sitting with. Until the next story, may you walk closely with the God who never fails.